and that is who you are, then you're going to feel bad about yourself. And we use the word at Parker, normalize some of these things. Think about it, you know. He felt so different, and he felt so put down, and he didn't want to be who he was. Well, that probably comes from years. He mentioned middle school and high school probably was teased, and his father wasn't in the picture. So how does he process all that sort of stuff? He's angry, and he doesn't want to be who he is. And you know, if that kid had a life that was a different life, that was where he could see his strengths and he got positive feedback, and he, you know, had opportunities to be with like-minded peers, he could be a happy kid. Sure. But he wasn't. And I think that's often what I think it's getting better, but it's often what we're presented with fairly regularly. These kids just don't like who they are, and we have to we have to really use the strength-based approach to showing what they can and having like-minded peers to have fun, like any teenagers want to have. Do you have any additional observations?
How fortunate that the couple in Washington, D.C. had found each other to rely on each other, just as you had said, that, you know, that to make a friend and to have someone to walk through life with is so valuable. It almost feels like, in viewing this film, you know, that compared to understanding algebra or passing U.S. history just feels like so much more essential to gaining access to that quality of life after school, and, you know, being able to give and take for a companion, be a friend or a romantic relationship.
What else would anyone like to observe? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'd make a couple observations on the movie. One, I think the dramatic structure was well chosen in that you do not find out that Stephen has been married for 17 years until so far into the film. That in itself can be highly destructive of stereotypes. I also had a question, unless I missed something, we don't get a clue as to the jobs that the couple hold. And I think that is a flaw in the film, because being able to hold a job is part of self-respect for men, certainly, and for women. We see them living, I mean, she dresses very well, you know, and it might be nice if in fact this is family money, that they in fact hold jobs that pay real money, to break another stereotype that all you can do is bag groceries or open boxes. Nice to see that the gentleman might be a lab technician and she might be a fashion designer or whatever.
And the truth is, many of them are highly successful in their careers, and Microsoft and Google and Apple have whole divisions that they're hiring people on the spectrum for, because they're very skilled. And I think the guy worked in the weather industry. He was letting out a balloon. It's a really good observation, because stereotypes, you cannot stereotype this population at all. One thing we know about people on the spectrum is they're uniquely who they are, and there isn't really an easy description of who they are. What I did like about the film was that it did present a different, sort of three uniquely distinct, the couples, the two couples and the young man, and I think that gave it some breadth of the experiences that some of these, you know, these people have. It's also interesting to me that I use again the word normalize. Ask anyone, what does love mean to them? They're troubled by the fact that they can't quantify it and qualify it, but we're all troubled by what does love mean to us. And I think at times, you know, what am I looking at? I'm thinking, I mean, I think at times they think they're clueless about a lot of things that everyone's clueless about, and they think it's unique, and it isn't unique. And we see that all the time. but those are good, you know, we shouldn't be stereotyping anyone for that matter, but in particular, this population, because, yeah, they're really different.
I didn't get the names, maybe
Mhm.
someone else did, the young man who got the job at the grocery,
Right.
was he Matt?
I'm not sure, I can't remember his name
He was
either.
speaking to the
I think it
director
was
named
Lenny.
that, his name was Lenny.
Lenny.
His name was Lenny.
Lenny,
Lenny.
that's right. He's the only one that really clearly stated his anger and frustration. I think it was Steve who was married to Gita.
Right,
Yeah.
He never mentioned, who knows if he was asked the question, whether it would have been different, but he seemed to be fairly content with who he was and
right.
and didn't express that
You know,
anger.
there's,
Didn't express,
Yeah.
What-
he's not as expressive in those ways as the other ones.
It's true.
But the one thing too, that if I can just add to
Sure.
that real quick, is the fact that at the end, when you found out that she had passed away,
Yeah.
where he just, no,
Done.
I'm not in love anymore. It's like he didn't, it didn't translate, you know, it didn't.
But he missed her. He did say
Yes.
that.
There was a
Yes,
lot
he
of
did.
sorrow in his voice and
Yeah.
trying to struggle with how to express himself.
I think
You
that's
know,
good.
that he really, even though he
I
didn't
saw
want to
it.
admit that he wasn't still in love with her, his feelings were very evident.
He actually used the word sad twice.
Yeah.
That really struck me, as a person who didn't know perhaps, a greater vocabulary to draw upon to express what he was feeling inside.
Yeah.
I was quite surprised to hear him use the word sad twice.
it's important too, the access to language.
He might have just meant, I'm not in the relationship
Physical.
where the
Right.
love,
Physically no longer.
she's not here. That might have been what
Right,
he
so I'm
meant.
not actually in.
Right.
Yeah.
The relationships are not in love.
Right.
There is sometimes that sort of black and white practical look at things. Definitely have. If it's here, it's, if, you know, it's not here, it's not here. And pretty black and white things, for sure.
Just gonna say one thing that struck me that Lindsay said that really made me think was that she said she didn't feel like she absolutely needed to be understood in order to be loved.
Right.
She didn't think that those things had to be, you didn't have to have one
Coexist.
to have the other.
In fact,
thought
she
that was
asked,
interesting.
absolutely, she asked the question, can, someone truly love you if they don't understand you? And I think that's a question not just that Lindsay asked the world, but many, many people from all walks of life asked the world.
I was going to respond somewhat to I think what you brought up, and that's the idea of disclosure and identifying yourself and the language that sometimes goes with that. And my experience is that people have a choice. First of all, you should not be defined by your, quote, disability. I'm not sure autism is a disability in many ways. I think it's a style, but I'm independent in thinking that way. But a lot of kids don't want to be defined by their disability, so they don't use that terminology. And we don't really use it in our day-to-day operation. We talk about skills and strengths and needs and those sort of things. But there is a school of thought out there for sure that feels that, you know, you by having kids disclose it and understanding it, that's better for them. It's clear that this kid attaches a lot of negatives to the disclosure. And so whoever brought this to his attention didn't give him the breadth of what it really means. And so, you know, and there's some kids, again, that and some schools of thought think that they should be, you know, disclosing it and talking about it and defining themselves by that. I don't happen to think that, but
He's also younger than the other people, and he's
Correct.
accessing the internet for his knowledge base. And some of
It's
his
a good
identity is
observation.
coming from what is being put on the internet and YouTube. about
great
autism.
observation, yeah, for sure. And a lot of them do get, well, a lot of people get their information from the internet, from videos. I mean, let's face it, so, but that's true. And it was interesting, him talking about the sexual experiences that he had, and what that, you know, what that was for him. Well, it's good for about 20 minutes, but it's sort of one see any teenager or anyone that age, you know, without,
If they could be that honest and
Right.
expressive, yeah, really.
In front of the camera.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing for sure. These guys will tell you what they think. You know, they don't want, they can't lie. They don't know how to lie. I mean, it's hard for them to be manipulative. And again, when I say that, I'm overgeneralizing because everyone's a little different. And I love the word spectrum because I think it really, it's like with anything, there's degrees of it. And the age factor, I think it's a good one too. With time, you know, and the right sort of programming, I think people can really heal and be pretty successful. He was one of the angry ones, and we see that. We see those kids for sure.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or comments on what is either happening out there or could happen to help enlighten and educate and make the young people aware that aren't on the spectrum, what this all means, you know. You know,
Teaching tolerance, or is that what you're getting at?
Pardon?
Teaching tolerance?
no, not tolerant, no. Just an understand, you know, what, is there anything out there that, like, this to me wouldn't be a film that you would show, you know, elementary school age or middle, any school age,
Well,
really.
Again,
But,
it's a great question. What I have seen in the years I've been involved with these kids is that in general, the public schools are becoming much more aware of it. These kids are, the numbers are significantly more. And with that comes the kids actually, there is a strand of teasing that goes on, and bullying. There's no doubt about that. I think it's getting better overall. First of all, kids in general are quite tolerant of each other's sexual preferences, much more than when I was a kid. Bullying and policies are really strict now, and so you really get into trouble when you bully people, as you should. And I mean, if I saw a trend, I think the trend is that these some of these people, I will remind neurotypicals, they're going to be working for these people. So, you know, you better appreciate them and get to know them well, because they're often incredibly bright and capable in the areas that they're bright and capable. So I think, you know, Kirk, do you have an observation of that? Because you, as well, I'm going to throw that to my colleague, my school psychologist, but is it getting better? I think through bullying policies, through kids just being a little bit more, I think, a little bit more tolerant. I don't know.
Yeah, the tolerance, that's the thing that's really struck me, because I've been on the planet a long time, is that the tolerance among the school-age kids now is so different than when I was there. And so that gives me hope, you know, across sexual preference and different quirks that people have.
I mean, I'm not sure we answered your question.
I guess I was thinking more beyond tolerance, like being a little more on the proactive side of things. I was just wondering if anyone was aware of whether there's an active program going on in any school or this type of film that would. I don't know.
Speak up.
You're
You're getting nailed.
He was talking of Comic-Con, right? These kids have things that they're really into that they go to together. We took a group to Japan, actually, this last spring. Why? Because they're all into anime, and they're into the graphic novel things, and they're really into that. And they have their peer groups, and some of the kids that are not on the spectrum get sort of, that appeals, that can appeal to them, because it's pretty cool. We do games, for example. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Well, Dungeons and Dragons, for example, these kids are really into those sort of things. And it isn't kids that are just, and I think the way that people get to appreciate each other is by engaging, we call it sort of play therapy, because I think it really is incredibly therapeutic, to play with each other and to have fun. And it's in those situations, a lot of times, you develop some really good social skills and pragmatic. So it's going on out there. I mean, and these kids are really having fun, and bragging about the fun they're having, and other kids are looking at it maybe and going like, wow, they're really into that. That's sort of cool. So I think, yeah, go ahead. Either one of us.
I'm first, Carrie, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, put it together. So, just working in a public school,
Yeah.
I personally feel that things have changed in public school in the last 20 or 30 years or so. And that more children are included in the classrooms with
Right.
every varying disability. You
Right.
can possibly, it's not just autism,
Mhm.
we see everything in the public school. And this is starting preschool and kindergarten. So it's not even teaching tolerance is all around them. It's part of your normal curriculum, it's part of your everyday. When she's teaching in kindergarten, children to play with each other, and naturally you're teaching the autistic child, it's all naturally embedded, and it's not that child is isolated, like it was 20 or 30 years ago, where they're all in the classroom, and you could, I remember in high school, and they're all walking through the hall, all the special needs children, and you're like, oh my gosh, now what do we do, because they all want to come out of their classroom and going to lunch. And it was a very isolating feeling. It's not like that. Everybody's included, and everybody's in the classrooms now where they weren't in the classroom. And I think even the spectrum and how many children are getting identified as being on the spectrum, and as we get to know more about children on the spectrum, it's starting to make things clearer, as to even, I don't know exactly, but it used to be they were schizophrenic. That's what they used to think they were. Now they're starting to there's a lot more knowledge going into identifying children with these disabilities and with that. Luckily, we get more knowledge too, because we have to. There are children everywhere, all varying disabilities, not just the spectrum. So.
And I,
Well,
I think there's still like a small part where the acceptance part, we're still
For
trying
sure.
to teach children, how to interact with them, and definitely highlighting their like strengths,
Mhm.
and using that to have them make connections with other children,
But also teaching that to
they
the
don't
typical
feel
students, too.
they don't feel like they're out of place or don't feel quite right, so acceptance is definitely a big thing.
Early intervention, those sort of things that are happening in your elementary schools. We for years had just a high school, and in the last 10 years or so, we've had a middle school. And when we've gotten kids early, it's so, by the time they're graduating, I think our graduating class, 11 kids, all the kids that were actually on the spectrum are going on, to something. It wasn't the case for some of the typical stuff. I mean, going on to further education. So I think, I think that as population, as we get to appreciate them and understand them. I mean, I was at a conference probably now 8 years ago, and there was a guy that sat on the National Autism Board, and his name was Ari Neiman, and he was autistic and Asperger. And he stood before this large group of people, and he said, "We don't want to be like you. We like who we are. So quit making us trying to be normal. 'Cause we're not. You guys are weird. We like the way we are." And it was really refreshing. And I think sometimes, different is sometimes better. And the more we can get kids to appreciate the better part of the difference as opposed to the deficits, because the deficits can be really extreme too. I mean, it can be really hard for these guys to, depending on, the socialization. And certainly, things like love and relationships is a tough one. I'm not sure we, are doing as much as we can in those areas, because that's a tough area, for sure. I liked that they weren't coming up with simple solutions. Go ahead, you seem to know what you.
I wish we could do more at the high school level in transitioning our young adults out into the real world in terms of relationships and love and sex. I struggle because we have all this sex education and they're sitting in these wellness classes and they're getting facts, but they're missing how that applies to them. And as a special educator and a school psychologist, it's really difficult. You're walking this really fine line and trying to have these conversations but still be appropriate for a school setting. But I do feel like they're conversations that need to be had, and they need to be like, who's going to talk to this kid about paying for sex and about where you get your information and who you go to if you have questions. Like, who has these conversations if we're not having them in the public schools?
And we're not having them with normal kids either, by the way, that really need to have it. And I would agree, but it's much harder for these kids. You know, you think about developmentally sometimes, you see it, you know, you think maybe like it's 3 or 4 or 5 years younger in terms of them sort of understanding. You know, with the right programming, you know, positive, again, reinforcement, I think, ultimately these kids can be pretty, these can be pretty highly functional. The damage, you know, the statistics around bullying are pretty scary. And in that it can be really devastating for a long time. It doesn't go away, you know. So some of these kids remember the bullying and you know, any major, you know, as a psychologist, any major sort of emotional event stays with you. And the repeated, you know, bullying can be really pretty devastating, so it's hard.
I think too, we need to look at some reverse programming too. I
Yeah.
mean, we're looking at, and I know you said early intervention is great. I hate to see the reduction in social skills support as they get older.
Right.
Because I feel like in a developmental disability, these kids weren't ready to be taught some of these skills at these young ages when these social skills groups are happening. Whereas when they get to high school, they're finally ready for some of this stuff that their neurotypical peers were learning in 5th or 6th grade.
You want to observe that because you've had.
Right. It almost feels that teams of, folks are sometimes fortunate to have teams working on their behalf as they are guided through the school system. It almost feels as our conversations are filled with those easy numbers, you know, attendance and grades. When all is said and done, I share your perspective that what have we done when they've left the school system, the formal school system, to prepare them for being able to form a relationship, ask someone out, accept feedback and know where to get the right facts. That isn't part of our current conversation in those meetings or in the greater school discussions yet, but it can be.
Yes.
I'd like to go different direction
Sure.
for a moment while you're here. People are talking about remembering when they were children. I don't remember there ever being such a thing as an autistic person, nor any behavior that would be subsequently labeled that. With your expertise, can you tell us if you think there is a growth in it and what the causes might be?
I think there definitely is an increase in numbers. I think it's genetics. I think there are more autistic people having children, and therefore you may have more of them. I don't think the research supports anything around vaccinations and things like that, although some people feel that way. I don't think the research supports that. I think they have been around for actually quite a long time, and I think and frequently one of the parents of the 2 kids, because we interview families, not just kids, is usually someone on the spectrum to some degree. There's a lot of engineers, you know, actually scientists, and what better person would you want operating on your or cardiologist? What better person would you want operating on your heart that has a really fine-tuned specialty that can can really focus for a period of time. So I think there's an increase, but I think with much of our clinical world, and Kirk, you may want to comment on this, it's that we come up with it, we finally, or education world too, finally have the tools to determine what that means. And so I think we see new diagnoses all the time. Kirk,
Yeah, the numbers are just, the factoids are just kind of weird, you know, that back when I was starting out in the 70s, you know, it was 1 in a couple thousand.
Right.
And now they're saying it's 1 in 67 kids are on the spectrum, and so I don't know what to make of it, but there's more, and the Y's, I don't know. but
It's
there.
the $1 million question. Do you want to comment, Karen?
Well, like when I was growing up, of course,
I live near Spalding Youth Center too, so our version of autistic was the severe
Sure,
S.
sure.
And I think because we now know what people who appear to be normal, me, you,
Right.
a lot of kids we know,
Right.
would not have been in that
Identified.
category that we could identify today. And even more today than.
That's a really good point, actually,
I have
in
an
answering the question.
Yes, you do. Often.
No, but it's a
My son went to
spectrum
his school for
disorder, and
7
a lot of
years.
those people would never have been identified.
Right,
Yeah,
they were the
weird.
ones
They were
maybe
really
first
weird.
odd
They were,
ones.
yeah, they were,
Yeah.
you know, higher IQ
They were
autism.
in the AV club at school.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, they wore the pocket protectors.
Yeah.
That's what they
That's a
were.
real-
Yeah.
Now we just
That's
put
a
the
good point.
pocket labels, more labels. Some you
Well,
need a label
I-
to get help, but,
Mhm.
you know.
I think all those are really good answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yes.
I was wishing we could ask the makers of the movie why the person interviewing Lenny, I guess we're saying he was the young
Yeah.
kid, the interview sounded as if Lenny was interviewing himself on just on a screen. The interviewer gave him so little feedback and you didn't hear the questions. Why was that?
I don't know.
I,
That's good.
I would have been angry if I was him being interviewed that
But
way.
Maybe they were
although,
pausing it though.
although it's interesting that, because that final interview there at the center where he's being treated, he responds to the filmmaker saying, "It's okay, you don't have to cry. I'm the one who'll cry." So there was some kind of feedback going on, but it's very possible too they gave them cameras and you know, and let them do what all kids do now and talk to themselves on screen.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah, well,
Maybe Letty just wanted to be himself.
right. Yeah.
The only way to get an authentic response from someone is to not give your feedback, because you bias their response. So he probably had to let it go longer than he even maybe wanted to get a.
I'm sure it was edited a lot.
Yeah.
Do you know how long of a period of time it was filmed over?
I don't know, we were seeing they were talking like 2012 or something, weren't they? And then it actually came out in 2014.
Yeah,
Um,
show in 2013 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably about a year.
Probably or more, yeah. Because they, obviously, you know, he had his period of time when he was losing his wife. There was
Yeah, she passed away in 2013, so.
Right.
Yeah. Had to be at least a couple of years.
You know, there's another good film that you've probably heard of this, but Temple Grandin is a great film.
Yeah.
Claire Danes does,
Yeah.
plays Temple Grandin, who I've met and actually
Yeah.
heard speak a number of times. It's just an awesome movie that really gives you a perspective. The reason I bring that up is the death, the idea of the concept of death for them, you know, it is a pretty abstract concept. They're here and now they're gone. And like, what does that mean emotionally? It's really hard. It's really hard for these folks who I understand it's hard for all of us, in fact, to a larger degree for these guys.
Did you see the movie Dancing in Ohio?
How to Dance in
How to
Ohio.
Dance Ohio.
How to dance on it.
How to Dance in Ohio. It's
It's
on
not the same movie.
HBO. It's a documentary. It comes out, I think, in about a month outside of that, but it's on demand if you get a chance. But we watched it today. I did a professional development after school today,
Good.
and it's fantastic. And it's a clinical psychologist who runs social skills groups for young adults and actually older adults too.
Right.
But he focused on young adults and on the autism spectrum, and throwing an event that took months and months of planning and preparation, role playing, lots of social skills instruction, lots of social skills practice, but it was really good.
And it was amazing to hear, you know, the teenagers, you know, he'd say, well, he said at the dance, you're gonna go up and you're gonna find someone you wanna talk to and you're gonna introduce yourself. And he says, wait, how do I know I wanna talk to him? You know, and he's like, well, you'll have this stop. He looks into it. And I'm like, just very step by step by step. And it culminated in this social.
You hear a lot about social groups, and I think they can, they can be really effective. I had one of those aha moments. Kirk and I have always had a positive approach to psychology, and in our approach to kids. And really looking at strength-based approach. What are these kids into that we can get them to do? And I just remember observing a D&D group, which is Dungeons and Dragons, and it's really complicated, and I couldn't begin to understand it, never really. But I was watching their social, I was watching how much fun they had, but I was also watching how they were listening to each other, how they were respecting each other, how they had mutual, they had conversations. It looked so, I was just watching, and it looked so typical of a group of teenagers having fun and being really appropriate and really, and feeling normal about what they were doing. And so, I mean, I think I probably had that aha moment close to 10 years ago now, but I mean, and it really taught me that, look, get these kids doing things with each other and bring in, give it some variety, and they will intuitively gain some of those social skills. And especially with the older kids, because I find that the older kids don't want to sit down and talk about social skills. I think the younger kids, I mean, and then you have your teachable moments, of course, where you can interject, but play together, have fun together, so, yeah.
So then is it helping them to be in a group with a higher proportion of kids on the spectrum?
Well, I would say yes, and the reason for that is you want like-minded peers wherever you're doing. If you like to play basketball, you go and play a bunch of people that like basketball. If you like playing games, to feel normal about who you're with. Now, it doesn't mean that has to be exclusively those kids, but they do tend to, I think there's a lot to be gained for having peers and playing and doing things together. Yeah, definitely. Kirk,
Yeah, I agree. It's not but you gotta be careful, because
Right.
it sounds like you're isolating, but not.
No.
It's that it's not you are gonna go into the room and play D&D. They're drawn by their common interest.
Right.
And we know, the young adults and older adults, that gaming continues on in, well out of school.
and that's one small area. I mean, there's other things that these kids are into. I mean, so you give them choices to do that, and they'll also, and they'll have other kids in there as well. I mean, some of these kids are really, a lot of them are looked up to for what they're able to do.
We
You
were
know,
talking
they
about
really
the LARP
respect
program that
The
we have
LARP,
at
yeah.
school.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that
A little
is
tricky on the State House lawn, we discovered. You learn.
LARP, it's live action.
Role playing.
Role-playing.
Yeah.
And they
Kids
dress
with
up
swords.
as knights and swords, and they actually have game plans, and they sit down and they're like, this is our strategy, and it just levels the playing field.
Theater, these kids are awesome.
Yeah.
But I think there's an important distinction there too between academic and social. And I feel like there are lots of social components that occur within the academic setting. But I think when you're talking about, like when you said you have to be careful, we're not talking about isolating. We're
Right.
talking about providing social opportunities for
Right.
like-minded people to
Right.
do like-minded things.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's different than having a whole classroom that's just being
Specifically.
taught, for kids, like on an academic level that are on the spectrum.
And they do get looked at, those are the kids that they're
Right.
the most creative, and they come up with the greatest costumes, and
One of our girls who graduated a few years ago, I was talking to the math teacher, and she literally could visualize calculus and would come up with an answer. She's now in an engineering program, but she was amazed by that capacity. And a lot of these kids are doing high-end math and sciences at pretty young ages and doing really well.
figure out an design day.
And again, to accentuate that and to reward that and, give them the positive feedback that comes with those skills. We all have, and normalizing the fact that, okay, you have some deficits, we have strengths, everybody does. And so, you can work on this stuff, but it doesn't mean you're not really good at a lot of stuff too, so. Any other?
What about medication? Like, I didn't notice any of them on it, but aren't a lot of kids, like Lenny, wouldn't a lot of people be tempted to drug Lenny?
Well, I think that it really depends on the individual kid. If he's got other handicap conditions like depression or inattention or those type of things, then certainly, medication is something that we look at. And some of these kids do have, we call comorbid things going on with, and certainly one of the interventions is can be medication. I mean, healthy living, exercise, all those other things you try to do first, but, you know, sometimes these kids do need medication. I'm not sure any more than any of the other in the population, but, you know, but I think you can't medicate for autism per se. You can medicate for depression, you can medicate for anxiety, and we do see a lot of anxiety in general in our population now that isn't on the spectrum, you know, but that is one of the coexisting conditions that with these guys, so medication is sometimes necessary.
I feel like anxiety and depression is even more common in your very high functioning kids on the spectrum because
Right.
they have heightened sense of awareness, and with that awareness comes that it's painful awareness that you're very different than your peers and you want to fit in and you just don't know how. So
I think that's a great observation, yeah. I mean, look at the difference between, God lost his wife. Stephen was probably not real high functioning intellectually, and it's not.
Although he was a
it's just-
good Jeopardy player.
Yeah, although he had facts, he had some facts, and I'm not saying he was global,
crystallized intelligence.
but he was not, he processes the emotional things a little differently than some of the higher functioning people that we saw in that film. I think that's a great observation. Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you
Thanks
both.
for coming, yeah. Thank Jamie and Red River Theater, you know, this is a great organization. They do a lot of good stuff for the community, and so if you are thinking about donating to someplace, help out Red River Theater, they're great.
Thank you.
And PBS, thank you, PBS.